Good morning. Nice to see you again. It's been over a year since we've been here before. I always say every time I stand up here, and I will never stop saying it, probably, we'll see, that Broken Arrow has been such a huge blessing to our lives, and I hope that we've been a blessing to your life. So thank you for that, and thank you for being here today. It's good to be here. Greetings from our church, from our congregation in Kharkov. They sent a big hello. You are a big part of our life in Kharkov and are part of our church, and they know that, and so they send you a big hello. This is a short trip for us. Usually we're here in BA a little longer. Usually we're in the States a little longer, but it's a short trip, and we'll tell you more about that tonight. So come back this evening, and we'll talk more about what's happening in our near future. We leave on Tuesday. It's been a quick 12 days, I think, since we've been here. But we will see you again in the not too distant future for hopefully a greater chunk of time. Go ahead and open your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 18. If you're using a Russian Bible, that would be 3 Kings chapter 18. It's kind of interesting. Where did they get the extra kings? Recently, I was studying through a familiar section of the life of Elijah, famous stories from Elijah, and I was challenged by a low place that he found himself in and felt like I could relate to it, and I was challenged by what God did, how God interacted with him, and I thought we could look at that this morning together. Because sometimes I get real anxious, I get tired of what seems to be a lack of God's involvement in this world. Where I think he should be doing something and he's not doing something, or at least I wish he would make himself known in some way to people who shake their fist up in the air and say you're not even there. You know? I want some justice for God. I want him to be known. I want to see a real miracle. Sometimes I want to see a real live miracle in front of my face for me, and often I want to see it for somebody else. I want them to know. I want to see an obvious supernatural answer to my prayers because it just doesn't seem like anybody's listening. I don't know if you can relate to any of this, but sometimes these are things that I go through. Sometimes I feel alone in my faith, even in a room full of Christians. Sometimes I feel like maybe I'm the only one who cares, or sometimes it just all feels too tough. These are familiar feelings to all of us, and they're familiar feelings to everyone in the Bible. The psalmists asked God where he was. The prophets asked God why he wasn't acting. These are human feelings, even for people, especially for people of faith. And it's during these moments, I think, in our lives, these challenging moments where we have a fight or flight response in our faith, where we either say, that's it, God must not exist, or if he does, I don't want to believe in a God like that, and we take off, or we stand up to God and kind of fight in a way. Where are you? Why aren't you listening? Why aren't you here? And that does something to us. Elijah found himself in one of these personal valleys. And the lessons learned here, I think, are important for all of us. They have been important for me because it's a challenge to remember who God is in all circumstances in life, in good and in bad, and to stay faithful to what he's asked us to do no matter what. So before we get to 1 Kings 18, I want to recap the story of what happened before. We need to remind ourselves what came before to really understand and relate to what we're going to go over today. If there is one key to effective Bible study, it's context. What's going on in the big picture here so that I know what I'm looking at and how it's supposed to speak to me. So to go back a little bit, in chapter 16, we're introduced to a new king who begins to reign in Israel, King Ahab, considered to be one of the worst, if not the worst, kings of Israel. It says that he did more to provoke the Lord than any king before him. Not a lot of good there. And then it says, if that wasn't enough, he married this terrible woman, Jezebel. And Jezebel was not a believer of Jehovah God, and so much so that she went out to destroy the prophets of God, that she hated them so much. This king and his wife led the people away to worship idols, and his wife did what she could to destroy followers of God. And so in chapter 17, we're introduced to this guy, Elijah. And Elijah speaks for God, and God is going to send him to facilitate some discipline. The whole nation has turned away from God, and God says it's time to do something about this again. And God says through him, Elijah's words, he comes and preaches and says that there is going to be a drought in the land, which is terrible. At that time, no running water. There were no other options. If there was no water, there were no crops. There was nothing to drink. It was a bad situation, which is interesting because it was a punishment, obviously, but it was also a point, because Baal and Asherah were the gods of fertility. So these gods who were in control of the fertile crops and the fertile land were all of a sudden going to not seem like they were in very much control of it. God was punishing them and making a point to say, who is the real God here? I said it's not going to rain, and it's not raining, and you're praying to a God who obviously has no control over these crops that you think they do. So Elijah says it's not going to rain, and it stops. I can't get past that without imagining how that feels. To speak this word and say, God is speaking through me, and then instantly this miraculous thing happens. The water stops falling from the sky. It starts drying up in the rivers and the streams. And obviously this is going to be one of those times where everybody wants to shoot the messenger. And so Elijah disappears for a while. And he's out in the desert, and the water dries up, and he has no food. And God miraculously helps him. He sends birds to bring him his food, and he is able to survive. Another miracle, I wish I had those to see in my life. I wish I had those to experience myself. During this time, God sends Elijah to raise a widow's son who has just died. Through him, through his hand, through his words, however the process worked, God allowed him to come back to life, and he used Elijah to do that. And I think as a minister, I would love to see something so tangible, such proof to say, look, there is a God and he is working through me. God continues to make himself known in Elijah's life in big ways, and I have to say I get a little jealous of that when I read the Old Testament especially, but in the New Testament too. So by chapter 18, 3 years have gone by. It hasn't been raining for 3 years, and God tells Elijah, it's time. It's time to bring it back. So in chapter 18, verses 17 and 18, he's coming to the king. He's showing himself in what I imagine, if it were a movie, a lot of background drums, and it comes from behind the wall or something. But he says, chapter 18, verse 17, when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" And he answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals." The king still blames all this on Elijah. You stopped the rain. And Elijah says, no, this is because of you and because of what you have done. And then he calls him to a challenge. Verse 19. Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. He said, here's what he hasn't said anything about the rain yet, actually. He just says, I'm back, and we're going to do something. Call all your guys. We're going to hike up this mountain. At the time, there's no water. Up to the top of the mountain and have this challenge. So they do that. I love his confidence. I love that he's able to go stand before his enemy, essentially, and speak God's word and say, this is what we're going to do, and this is the fact of the matter. And he has that, I believe, because he knows God's with him. And again, I wish I felt that way. I wish I acted that way more often. So he takes them up to the mountain. We're not going to go over this story in particular. If you don't know this story, you should go back and read it because it's very interesting. But he takes them up, and there's this challenge. We're going to build a sacrifice for Jehovah God. We're going to build an altar to sacrifice and build an altar for Baal. And whichever God answers the sacrifice by fire is the real God. And they say, hey, that's a good idea. And so that's the plan. They embarrass themselves, calling on Baal for hours and hours and hours. Nothing happens. And then Elijah does this crazy thing by pouring water, again at a time where there was very little water, covering this altar with water, and God answers with fire, and the people are amazed, and they turn their hearts back to God, and they destroy these false prophets of Baal, and it's amazing. God answered, God acted in this very visible way. How cool. How cool that would be to be Elijah, or to be friends with Elijah. But God isn't done working. He doesn't stop there because he told Elijah, we're going to bring back the water. We're going to bring back the rain. And so Elijah tells Ahab to get going because God's going to send the rain. And if he doesn't leave now, he's not going to be able to make it home. It's going to be raining so hard. And then the rain starts to come, and God blesses Elijah with this miraculous ability to run faster than the chariot all the way back to town. And I think, why can't I do that? He's got this superhuman natural ability to run faster than this horse. It's obvious God has been working through him. He knows it. What a day. What a 3 years. But specifically, what a day. This has been quite a day where God has obviously shown, I am there. I am in control. Elijah is my guy. And then it ends with him being able to do something nobody else can do. How would you feel? How do you feel after a very literal mountaintop experience where God has been working? Feel awesome. So I read this and I think, I would love to feel that way. I would love to see God work that way. I want that. So how would you feel? Satisfied? Special? That God worked through you in that way? He saw proof. He experienced the proof. And sometimes 2,000 years, well, we're more than 2,000 years later, 2,000 years since the time of Jesus, we're inclined to think if I just saw a miracle, or if they just saw a miracle, then they would believe, then we would know, then we would have this faith. We would have this strong, strong faith. It's obvious God's working. But what happens? What happens after this? And this we're going to slow down a little bit, looking at chapter 19. Ahab makes it home to his wife, and he tells her all the crazy stuff that just happened and how they destroyed 400 of her favorite prophets. Let's read 19:1 through 4. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "So may the gods do more to me and more also if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." Ahab tells her what happens. She threatens the life of Elijah. And how does he feel? Afraid, scared. Why? How, after that whole day, could he fear anything? And yet he's afraid, and he flees to another town and leaves his servant there and just goes out into the wilderness and says, "Just kill me, God. I'm tired of it. I'm no different than the prophets that they've killed before. Just take my life." He just went from a very, very high of God working through him in visible, powerful ways, and in 2 days he wants to die because he's afraid. How could he do that? Why would he do that? How can a prophet be afraid? How can the Israelites forget what God's done and return over and over and over again like we read in the Old Testament? How are Jesus' disciples able to watch what Jesus does and still not have faith and still be afraid? Today, we are jealous of those who got to experience these things firsthand. But in actuality, it doesn't look like that was really a help for them either. Even though they got to see it, they still struggled with the doubts and the fear. So what is the problem? And the problem, I think, is something we all, as believers, struggle in from time to time, some of us more than others, and that's what I call faith Alzheimer's. Where we've seen God work in our life. We know He's alive. We know He is strong, yet we struggle with faith and with confidence before Him. We can't remember what God's done from one day to another. Justice is a perfect example of that. For 9 years we prayed for a baby and didn't know why. We were struggling with infertility, and finally we're able to adopt this little miracle. And the moment I saw him, thinking, now I know why. Now I know God was working through this process. Now I know this was the reason why. And then fast forward a few weeks, and God doesn't seem to be answering any of my prayers fast enough, and I think, where are you? It's Alzheimer's. We forget these things that we knew, but now they're gone. We're on fire one day, and the next day we ask ourselves, maybe God's not really there after all, or if He is, maybe He just doesn't care. We like to think that if we could just see some proof, have some evidence, then we would believe. But Elijah's proof that that's not always true, and actually we're proof that that's not always true, because we will stand up and proclaim, look what God has done, and the next day feel like, where is He? I haven't seen Him forever. We sink so low after being so high, and it's because we forget who God is. And so we have to fight against this. We read many times of people forgetting God and what He had done. In Deuteronomy 4:9, Moses actually says, take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Moses telling the people, you have to try to remember seeing God part the Red Sea. Don't forget that. How could you forget that? Because we all suffer from this. We all do. The problems of today erase the miracles of yesterday. And it takes effort to do that. And I think just a few things that help is to remember to stay connected to our faith. That's reading the Bible more. That's fellowshipping with each other. That's journaling and remembering the things God's done so that you can look back and remember, oh yeah, I was on top of that mountain. I totally forgot about that. But what Moses made clear and what's just obvious is we have to consciously fight this and use the knowledge that this happens to help us through those valleys. That, okay, I know I'm feeling this way, but look at the things God has done, or look at what somebody shared, on Sunday, and it's a reminder of the things that I believe and hold true. So we continue. 5 through 8. So he's saying to God, take my life. And he lay down and slept under a broom tree, and behold, an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. Okay, don't miss what just happened. He's down. He feels like life's not worth living again. God sends an angel who makes him dinner. That should be a big reminder, right? So he gives him this great food, and then he gives him another meal, and it's not just any meal. He's got a big journey ahead, and that one meal holds him over for 40 days. It's a big, hello, I'm still here, I'm still in charge from God. And so what does he do? 9 through 10. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they all seek my life to take it away." So what's his complaint? I'm the only one left. There's no point to this anymore. Just let me die. I'm tired. Obviously nothing's working. The people have turned away from you. I passionately have been working for you. And what's there to show for it? Nothing. He's depressed. He feels alone. He feels hunted. And the whole world's out to get him. Have you ever felt that before? Have you ever sensed any of these feelings before? What's the point? Why doesn't anybody else? Why are we doing like this? Why is the church so stagnant? Why, we feel like all of a sudden we're the only ones. So God asks him, "What are you doing here?" He answers. And so what does God do? 11 through 13. And he said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, one more time, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" This is very reminiscent of when God showed his glory to Moses. God shows his power over nature, but the text makes sure to tell us God wasn't in those displays of his power. He's controlling all of these things, but then he comes to him in a whisper and asks Elijah again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he answers, verse 14, "I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." He repeats his complaint. I'm the only one. And again, I think we can all relate to this. I'm the only one left. It's only my health that's failing. I'm the only one who cares. Our country's going to pot. I'm the only rational one left. And then this. After 40 days of alone time, and after listening to his complaints twice, kind of 3 times, God is finally going to respond, which is kind of what he has been wanting. So after all of this and all of these complaints, what does God say? Verses 15 through 17. And the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, and Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death." I love God's response here because he's not talking to me. He's complaining. God says, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "I'm the only one, and things are terrible." And God asks him again, and he says it again, and he comes to him in a whisper. And what is God's response? "I hear you. Now get back to work." God doesn't even address, right? Am I the only one? Is everything bad? Am I being hunted? Because what does all of that matter? God's given him 40 days to sulk, and he goes off and he's complaining, and God says, "Okay, I hear you. I'm sorry. Now you've got a big to-do list to get back to. You've been gone for 40 days. Get back to work." Because really, what do those complaints matter? Is God still God? If the answer is yes, there's nothing to worry about. Does he control the wind and the earth and the fire and everything? If your answer is yes, then what's there to worry about? You just do what I've called you to do, is God's answer to Elijah. This is a powerful message for all of us, especially for me. It's a difficult thing to hear, but it's necessary. Because when we feel like we're having a hard time, when we feel like we're low, when we don't know what to do or what's next, or how to get out of our current situation, what do we do? What God has told us to do, and that's it. It reminds me of when Peter is talking to Jesus at the end, and Jesus is telling him what's going to happen to him, and he points to John and says, what about that? And Jesus says, you just do what I've told you to do. Who cares about him? I'm talking to you. You just follow me. You just worry about what you're supposed to do, not about what you wish was happening or not about anything else. There's a great quote from the Screwtape Letters. Screwtape Letters is a book written by C.S. Lewis, and just to give you a little context, it's written from the point of view of a demon, so, point of view of Satan's side, this uncle teaching his younger demon nephew about the demon business, to give him lessons on how to effectively battle God in this world, battle the faith of believers in this world. It's a very, very good book. But this older demon is talking to his nephew, and he says this: our cause is never more in danger than when a human, no longer desiring, but still intending to do our enemy's will, that is God's will, looks around upon a universe from which every trace of him seems to have vanished and asks why he has been forsaken and still obeys. I love that. He says, we've got nothing left if a believer looks around and says, where is God, but still gets down and prays to him. It's during these difficult times our faith has to shine the brightest. It's during these difficult times that we prove to ourselves and to others what we actually believe. So God gives Elijah 40 days to get away, to be mad, to be scared. Then he comes to him and says, time to get back to work. It's time to get moving. And of course, many of us know that that's not all, he says. Verse 18, yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. God says, and by the way, you're not the only one. You may feel like the only one, you may feel like the whole world's out to get you, but there are 7,000 other people who probably are in a similar situation, feeling, where is God during this difficult time in our country? Elijah felt alone. He felt like the only one, and that wasn't true. We feel like that sometimes. Individually, we feel like that sometimes as a church. And the truth is, even if it feels that way, it's not true. God knows who his people are, even when we're not aware of them. God has a plan, and he is working that plan, even if we can't figure out what's going on. We must simply be faithful to the tasks he's given us, even when we feel alone, even when we feel we're being hunted, even when we feel like it's all pointless. It's an important lesson for us, because we too quickly forget the things God's done. And then when we isolate ourselves, kind of like Elijah did, it's even harder to remember the amazing things God has done. We've got to stay connected. We've got to stay connected to his word, to him in prayer, to each other. That gets us through these valleys. Something about God I really like in this section is how he gave Elijah time to feel, that he was patient with them. He gave him this time to complain. And maybe you're somewhere similar in where you are right now in your faith. And maybe God's been patient with you while you've been in the desert and you've been complaining and pointing to others and expressing these doubts and fears. And God's been patient. And so maybe the message for you today is, okay, now get up and get back to work. Sorry about that, but let's go. Maybe that's what you need to hear today. Maybe you've been struggling with Alzheimer's recently. Maybe you've been discouraged with life or church or the chaos in the world, and you've been wondering where God is in all of this. And maybe it's time to let that go and remember who God is and just focus on what you know you need to do. Just because we don't see God working today like he did yesterday doesn't mean he's not there anymore. Maybe that just means we need to be a little quiet, stop hoping for the big displays of his power, and listen for his voice in that whisper. We're going to sing a song in a second. And if you would like to share some of where you are in your journey or the things that you have been struggling with in this way, maybe right now you have this thought as just nobody ever comes up anymore. What's the point? And maybe what you need to hear is just get up and go down there and do what you need to do. But share your journey, share your struggles with the church here, with your brothers and sisters, and if you feel like sharing that with the elders right now would be beneficial to you and beneficial to all of us here listening, I encourage you to do that as we stand together and we praise our living God together.